Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our Wednesday night community conversations with Sierra Club. My name is Rachel Stevens. I'm the volunteer chair for the Executive Committee of Vermont. And for those of you that don't know, we're a part of one of the oldest and largest grassroots organizations in the country, and we have a chapter here in Vermont. We are comprised mostly of volunteers, and we have one staff who's here, Rob Kidd, and I actually see several of our volunteer leaders on the line too, so thanks for being here. Shout out to you, Carl. We have a really exciting conversation here tonight. We're going to talk about the Attorney General's recent suit against several large fossil fuel companies for consumer deceptions. We're going to learn more about that. So we're really, really pleased to have Attorney General TJ Donovan here with us to answer questions about the state's case, and also Assistant Attorney General Justin Kolber, who's helping with the litigation. So I'm going to hand it right over to our guests. I want to just remind folks to mute your lines. Feel free to put questions in the chat. We're going to turn to questions from the audience around 7:30. So with that, I will hand it over to Attorney General Donovan. Welcome.
Welcome, Rachel. Thanks for having me. And Rob, thank you for the kind invitation to come and speak to members of the Sierra Club. I want to thank the Sierra Club for hosting this, and I want to thank my colleague and friend Justin Kolber from the Attorney General's office for joining me tonight. I understand you guys have been doing this every other Wednesday or so during the pandemic, and I hear it's must-see TV, so I feel a bit intimidated tonight that we have to deliver a compelling performance to keep the audience coming back. We'll do our best. But perhaps the most compelling thing was the title that I saw, which was the state of Vermont versus Exxon. That was pretty cool to see that in the title of this program. And we're happy to talk about our case. And this case is a little bit different, brought by against the big oil companies and these fossil fuel companies. This case is a consumer protection case. Most of the other lawsuits that folks have talked about or have been brought by other states bring different, what we call in the law, causes of action, like nuisance or trespass based on harms caused by climate change. Ours is a little bit different. Ours is, as I said, a consumer protection claim. And under Vermont law, this unfair and deceptive acts and practices that we're going to talk about. And our lawsuit is focused on the rights of Vermont consumers under Vermont law. And under Vermont state law, consumers can't be lied to or given misleading information when they buy any product. That includes fuel, on which, as we all know, we spend a lot of money. And we know that Vermonters as a group overall, we're environmentally conscious. We're aware of what's going on in the world. We're aware of climate change. And folks have changed their habits and advocated for change, such as fuel-efficient vehicles, the development of electric vehicles, the advocacy for more mass transit, for driving less, for biking, for carpooling, for teleworking that we're all doing. So these are conversations that we have all the time in our state, and Vermonters as consumers make those decisions, I think, every single day to do their part to protect our environment. And that's why this case is really, I think, interesting, because it goes back to that issue of what is deceptive, that Vermont consumers can't be lied to or given misleading information. And I just want to kind of set a baseline here when we talk about products and commerce. And let's be clear, gas that we buy at the gas station, it's a product. We're consumers. And you think about these different products, tobacco, for example, which caused enormous harm, and the litigation that came about as a result against big tobacco, and the changes that came as a result of just making sure that consumers had accurate and reliable information. Really quite revolutionary when you think about it. But when you think about when consumers become aware of information, when consumers have the right information, consumers make decisions. And those decisions, when they're aware, when they're educated, oftentimes moves markets, moves policy, and changes the way we do things. I think this case is going to be very similar. So this case, and I want to talk about what we allege the deceptive marketing to be, this concept of what we call greenwashing. And let's be clear, and Justin's going to go into this a little bit more in depth, but we allege that this is greenwashing, that these folks have known, these companies have known that fossil fuels are bad for our environment. They've known that, I think, since 1959, again, very similar to the tobacco case. They have not disclosed that. You have different iterations in the history about their different strategies and tactics that Justin will go through. But what it's led to, the last iteration, is this concept of greenwashing, that somehow these products are actually good for the environment, or less harmful for the environment, I should say, as other fossil fuel companies. And we think that's misleading. We don't think that's accurate. And the case is, this is a critical point, that the issue of greenwashing and the issue of accurate information, that you can't mislead Vermont consumers. I guarantee you that the first thing the oil companies will try to do is try to remove this case out of Vermont State Court. We filed in Chittenden County in Vermont Superior Court, and try to remove it to federal court, because they're going to say that climate change is a national and international issue. And what we're saying is this case is about protecting Vermont consumers, brought under the Vermont Consumer Protection Act. And the state of Vermont, we're not asking the court to outlaw fossil fuels or regulate how much is produced or sold in Vermont or anywhere. What we're simply asking the court is to make sure that the fossil fuel companies market these products to Vermont consumers in a way that complies with the Vermont law, that it's reliable, it's accurate, it's honest, and that you can't engage in this deceptive marketing of these products to Vermont consumers. And so we have, throughout our complaint, a bunch of examples from decades worth of concealing and greenwashing by these companies, which we allege is, again, unlawful because it's deceptive and misleading. I just want to say a couple of things. So in Vermont, the fossil fuels are actually sold directly to consumers by the big oil companies that we're suing, that they're directly sold by distributors or by franchisees who own our local gas stations. And so people have said, well, isn't this bad for Vermont businesses, for Vermont small businesses? Or why aren't you suing the local gas distributor or the local gas station owner? So let me be clear. The products that these local distributors that you get at your local gas station are selling, they're Exxon, they're Mobil, they're Shell, they're Sunoco, they're CITGO products. It's these big oil companies. They put them in the stream of commerce for the purpose of having them brought into Vermont to be bought by Vermont consumers. And so these big companies are the ones who denied and clouded the issue with the goal of preventing consumers from getting honest and complete information. And the big oil companies that we're suing are the ones who knew early on about the connection of fossil fuels with climate change. Not the local small business owner who owns the gas station that you go get a cup of coffee at and fill up your car. That's not who we're talking about. We're talking about the big oil companies. So the big oil companies, I allege, control and still control the messaging about fossil fuels and climate change. And the big oil companies that we're suing have done that, not the local gas station owner. So I just want to outline kind of what we're asking for. We're asking for a couple of things. The Vermont Consumer Protection Act provides for a penalty up to $10,000 for every violation. What's a violation? Anytime an ad arguably is aired in Vermont, which we would allege is misleading. But I think Justin will talk about this a little bit more. One of the things we're talking about is labeling. When you talk about different products, again, go back to tobacco and nicotine and labeling about the harmful effects that has on people's health. When you talk about uh, calories, when you talk about beer, when you go into a bar now, you see the alcohol content next to the price. You go to a fast food restaurant, you see calories. Why do we do that? We do that for public health. We do it for the public the welfare. Labeling again gives consumers that accurate and reliable information so they can make informed choices that they want to use their purchasing power for and not rely on, again, this misleading information. And so the question is not whether consumers will have to change their behavior, but whether or not they were likely to if the information that's given is reliable. And I think when you look at cigarettes, you see that consumers change their behavior. You see that in different aspects, whether it's sugary drinks or fast food restaurants, in my opinion. And so there's a lot of information developed through social science research that people who are informed of the risk of climate change and its causes will change their behavior away from contributing to climate change. That's just common sense. Consumers are smart. Vermonters are smart. And if we have a label that shows that a consumer, when they're informed that the risk of climate change and its causes and you have that information out there, the consumer is going to change their behavior from contributing to climate change. What does that mean? Maybe they purchase an electric vehicle next time they go to buy a car or lease a car. Maybe they go to an electric powered lawnmower next time. It's the little things that I think are in the aggregate can make a change here, but we have to give consumers the right information. We're not trying to shut these companies down. The products are legal. We're simply saying that the companies just need to be honest about their products and their impact on climate change and let Vermont consumers decide. I'm totally fine with that. Let Vermont consumers decide. That's all I'm asking. So we'll see where this case goes. It's going to be a heck of a fight. I know that. I really like the idea of labeling. I think when you look again at the history of products that are harmful, again, public health, public welfare, public safety, I think labeling is important because, again, it informs the consumer to make that informed decision. I trust Vermonters. But I just want to thank the Sierra Club for your support, because this is not easy and Justin knows this, as a small state. These are big companies with a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of resources in Vermont. We know that. But this is an important case. And it's an important case not only for the reasons that I've just outlined, it's an important case because we can demonstrate that in Vermont, when given reliable information, when given accurate information, we're going to make choices that are good for our public health, that are good for our public welfare. You see it in COVID, highly vaccinated state. We do the right thing in this state. And I think that if we can be successful on this case, it's another example of Vermont being out in front, albeit probably in a small way, but a meaningful way of letting consumers using the power of their wallet to make decisions that, based on accurate information, goes to address this issue of climate change. So I want to thank Sierra Club for your support, because this will be a big fight. I want to thank your support in the past. I want to thank your support going forward, because it will be a fight. And as a small state, we need all the help we can get. So with that, let me turn it over to Justin Kolber, who is an assistant attorney general in our office, who has done a tremendous job, not only on this case, but so many others. Justin's a great lawyer. He happens to be an even better human being. And there was a case that I just want to cite about Justin's work that he just worked incredibly hard on. Didn't really show up anywhere in the news, but there was a case, this coffee cup bakery company closed its doors, went out of business for a variety of different reasons. And the workers went to work Monday morning And unbeknownst to them, the company went bankrupt or was sold and the doors were locked. Imagine that, showing up to work for Monday morning and you're out of a job at 8:01. And they were owed money. And we didn't really have a dog in this fight. But Justin and others in my office made a compelling argument why we should get involved, that we need to stand up for workers in this state, and that when people are owed money because they've earned their money, they're entitled to it. And Justin did a great job going to court and fighting on behalf of those Vermont workers to get their wages paid back to them. So Justin is a true champion of Vermont, of working Vermonters in so many different ways. And he's a champion in Vermonters in this case and standing up for Vermont consumers. And you're going to hear more from him now about the specific complaints outlined in our complaint. So with that, let me turn it over to Justin.
Thank you, TJ. And yeah, I've been with the Attorney General's office for 10 years now, and I just want to say that I really believe strongly in the work of the Attorney General and the leadership of TJ Donovan. And so it's really nice to work on these kinds of matters. Thank you, TJ, for talking about Coffee Cup. It's really nice to be here to talk about Exxon. And I just want to say how nice it is when our work is seen and supported by the Vermont community. So that's Sierra Club, and that's all of you who are here tonight. So it's really appreciated by myself and the Attorney General. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes really walking through the legal claims in this case and doing a little bit of a deeper dive on what the Attorney General has summarized for everyone. So our case is against 4 defendants. It's Exxon, Shell, CITGO, Sunoco. They're the 4 largest suppliers of fossil fuel products in Vermont. ExxonMobil has around 80 gas stations in Vermont. Shell has 45, Sunoco has 40, CITGO has about 60. In addition to that, we found that these 4 defendants also had very clear evidence of the misrepresentations that we're going to go through. And so our case was filed a month ago in Chittenden Superior Court, as Attorney General Donovan mentioned. And as Attorney General Donovan explained, this is a Consumer Protection Act case. It's not about environmental harm. Our office has brought other cases that involve environmental harms. Sierra Club might be aware of our PFAS case. We've sued DuPont and 3M for their contamination of Vermont's environment with the PFAS chemicals. That's not what this case is about. This case is not about the polluted air quality or increased precipitation and the harms of climate change. This is about the lack of information and transparency that TJ expressed. So the only claims here are under the Consumer Protection Act. I've given our site here, and the broad purpose of the act protects the public against unfair or deceptive acts or practices, and we'll talk about what that means. And the Attorney General is authorized to enforce the statute. Private consumers can bring their own claims separately, but when there's a case to be brought in, quote, the public interest, the Attorney General may bring that action. It's in the name of the state. It's not on behalf of any individual consumers. It's not a class action. It's on behalf of the public, and the Attorney General can restrain and prohibit those unfair, deceptive acts or practices, and that's what our case seeks to do. So first, just setting the stage of what do we mean when we talk about consumer deception. And this quote here comes from some of the Vermont case law. It's a very broad test. A claim is deceptive if it likely misleads reasonable consumers. Likely misleads reasonable consumers. So that's the framework. That's the sort of perception I want everyone to just keep in mind as we walk through some of the examples I'm going to talk about. It's looking at this through the lens of yourself as a reasonable consumer. I purchase gas as well. So we're all reasonable consumers here. It's a very broad, practical test. And here's where we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts. And I want to make clear that all of this comes from our complaint. Rachel put the link in the chat, and all of the content, all of the quotes, all of the images you're going to see here tonight, this is all drawn from our complaint that's been filed. Our complaint is about 68 pages. You can read the details, and I'm going to highlight what we think are some of the strongest examples of deception. And when we talk about deception, that can mean many different things. So I'm going to break it down into categories. And I'm going to talk about this first category. I'm going to call this the omissions category. And Attorney General Donovan alluded to it when he talked about the knowledge that these defendants had going back to 1959. So for decades, these defendants sat on evidence and information in their possession that linked their product to climate change. And here are 3 examples. Starting in 1968, there's a report by the American Petroleum Institute. They're an organization that lobbies on behalf of the fossil fuel industry, and they had connected the temperature changes to fossil fuels, and that said that was bound to occur almost certainly by 2000, and that environmental damage could be, quote, severe. In 1982, you have an internal document from Exxon that talked about, quote, the clear scientific consensus and the unanimous agreement in the scientific community that linked CO2 emissions to fossil fuels. That's Exxon's own document. Then in 1988, Shell prepared its own internal report, and they said that fossil fuels are, quote, the primary driver of CO2 buildup. And by the time we can detect global warming in the year 2000, quote, it could be too late to reduce the effects. This is some pretty startling, very clear, unequivocal language that these companies knew their fossil fuel products were causing climate change and that the effects would be certain by the year 2000. It could be too late, it could be too severe. All of that information was withheld. Certainly, we as members of the public didn't know this information in 1982 or 1988 from these companies. Then we get to our second category of deception. And this is what we call the disinformation campaign. And this is a little bit later in the timeline. It starts to move into the 80s and the 90s. These companies, they had their own internal documents about the link of fossil fuels and climate change. And now the public is starting to become more aware. More reports come out, more scientific opinions and comes out. And so now they're going to change their strategy. And these are their own internal documents that say they need to come up with a strategy. And in 1988, you can see we cite an internal memo from Exxon, which tells them they should, quote, emphasize uncertainty around climate science and turn it into, quote, debate. And just remember that word debate. We're going to come back to that in a minute. In 1996, Exxon puts out a publication. This is now to the world. This is not an internal document. This is Exxon telling the world a warmer climate, I think this is interesting, quote, would be more healthful, and that greenhouse gases are, quote, a good thing that make our planet livable. This is now what Exxon is trying to portray to the public. And with that strategy, they put it into play in these campaigns they call advertorials. You know, it's meant to look more scientific, not just an advertisement, but an editorial. And they run these in the New York Times in the 1990s. And this one was called Science, What We Know and Don't Know. And the very first sentence of this article, as the debate over climate change heats up, and it goes on from there. So I just want to call attention to that because we saw in the earlier slide, Exxon has an internal memo that says, let's turn climate change into a debate. And here they are putting that into action here, and they call it the debate. Even though Exxon knew in its own internal documents, there was no debate, right? We saw that earlier slide that they had their own internal documents showing unanimous scientific agreement, but here's Exxon calling it a debate. So we call that this whole category the disinformation campaign. And then we'll get to this third and last category of deception, and Attorney General explained this really well about greenwashing. And I'm going to do a little deeper dive into what that means. And this is a little more recent in the campaign. So it starts with companies sitting on their knowledge, then they put out some false information and misrepresentations, and then they begin greenwashing when they realize that consumers really do care about the environment, and these companies are trying to change their brand and change their image. So right here, we're looking at an image and some excerpts from ExxonMobil. They rebrand their gasoline Synergy. Synergy sounds like a pretty positive word to me. And they call it, quote, their best fuel ever. They say it's 2 times cleaner. It reduces emissions, it burns cleaner, and it's part of their suite of green products. They don't explain anything further about what any of that means, and we'll go through that in a second. And just to have a framework for what we mean by greenwashing, this is a definition that's in our complaint. It's really when a company tries to portray itself as environmentally friendly or having no environmental harm, but really distracting the public from any environmental harmful damage that it's doing. You can think of it that the environmental damage is going to far outweigh any small benefits, right? If there's significant environmental damage, they're trying to distract from that with really small, minor, ancillary, or negligible benefits. And that's greenwashing, highlighting these negligible benefits when you're actually a significant contributor to environmental harm. That's the definition we use in our complaint. And then here are some images which we think falls under this greenwashing campaign. This is an excerpt from Exxon's website, and you can see they're really highlighting the imagery of a pristine mountaintop. And I don't know about others, but as a reasonable consumer, I wouldn't think of a pristine mountaintop when I think of ExxonMobil and the world's largest supplier of fossil fuels. And then they go on to include language about being a cleaner company, about reducing environmental impacts, about having rigorous environmental performance. And there's no quantification of what that means. There's no detailed explanation of how much they're reducing environmental harm or how much they're cleaning up the environment. It's just broad statements around that. Here's another excerpt from Shell. This is on Shell's Twitter account, and you can see the imagery they're using there. Again, it's very deliberate, very powerful imagery. And we see wind turbines. So apparently Shell is part of renewable energy. And do we know how much that is? You know, they say that they're powering progress and they're providing more and cleaner energy solutions. And certainly from this tweet, they're not saying what that means, right? They don't explain what cleaner energy means, how much they're investing in wind, what percent of its portfolio it is. But we as reasonable consumers would probably want to know that. Is Shell now 50% renewable? How much are they investing in wind turbines? Those are the kinds of disclosures reasonable consumers would expect. Moving on to another defendant, this is CITGO. And CITGO created a campaign called Fueling Good, where they were going to donate 1 cent for every gallon purchased, up to $8 million towards disaster recovery. And you can see the imagery used here about helping rebuild lives that were destroyed by flooding. And of course, the real irony here is that CITGO's own documents show that their products contribute to increased flooding and climate disasters, and they're going to donate some money to help that. Now, that certainly is laudable, and there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe $8 million is a good thing. I can certainly say we've looked at the cost of climate disasters. NOAA will put out a chart of the cost of climate disasters, and we know climate disasters are in billions and billions of dollars. And here's CITGO with their Fueling Good campaign. Again, no other clear disclosures around how their products contribute to increased flooding. So those are some of the core greenwashing statements. And then, as I mentioned before, the offset of greenwashing is that you really have small or negligible impacts. And so here's where we see the actual investments that these companies are doing in green initiatives. Right, it's imagery of trees and wind turbines. You can see here that Exxon has only invested 1% of almost $200 billion in alternative fuels. And as far as the reduction of emissions of its Synergy brand, we've documented that we call it small, you can call it minuscule. These are very, very small reductions of emissions. So the Synergy fuel is still a combustible gasoline that's emitting lots of CO2 into the atmosphere. And same with Shell. Shell is spending $17 billion on its oil and gas reserves, and they're investing just about 1% on those low carbon sources. So back to that imagery of wind turbines and statements about cleaner energy, here we know it's 1% of their portfolio. So keeping that in mind when we think about greenwashing is weighing the cost and the benefits. And certainly these companies are still massive contributors to climate change, and they're not disclosing that, and their investments in green initiatives are quite minuscule. So that's really the sum of the claims that summarize all of the categories of deceptions. Again, our complaint highlights many more examples, many more images, and many more statements. This is just a summary of the relief we're seeking, which Attorney General Donovan explained. We're seeking an injunction to stop any misrepresentations, and more importantly, to correct them, giving consumers clear information, clear disclosures. And then, of course, our statute allows us to seek civil penalties and disgorgement of profits. We don't have a figure yet. That's something that will be worked out in the litigation.
Hey, Justin, can you, great job. Can you talk about the labeling? I know at the press conference, we were asked the question and you gave, I thought, really a great answer. Can you just kind of talk about what that vision may look like?
Yes. So what we were seeking is a disclosure at the point of sale, and the point of sale is the pump in this case. And it could be similar to the sticker you see on a pack of cigarettes or the calories on a package of French fries. And some possible language that we've thought of could be something that says the use and consumption of this product contributes to climate change. Just a warning that there is a connection between the use and consumption of gasoline and climate change. It doesn't put blame on the defendant nor on the consumer. It doesn't say you are using this product and doing it wrongly. It's the way the product's intended to be used, but it's just understanding the connection there. So it could be a sticker on the pump that all consumers would see. And we know, as TJ explained, once consumers are made aware of information, they do change behavior. And more importantly, they have the opportunity to change their behavior, to make different choices. And that's what we're looking to do here.
Right. Thank you. I like this case because it's kind of simple. I mean, it's very linear. It's give us information, disclose it to reliable information, give it to the consumer, and let them decide. And, we're having this national and global debate, as we should, on climate change. But this lane that we're in is very specific. And, we did that by design. And, just listening to Justin's presentation again, it really kind of excites me because the simplicity of the claim is actually, I think, genius. And so I give credit to Justin and to Laura Murphy from my office, and Rob McDougall, the head of our environmental division. They really did a great job on this. And I think this will be, as I said, probably a drawn out fight, but I'd love to get to that point. I like the idea of labeling because I just think we've seen this work in other areas. And I think it's something meaningful that Vermonters would respond to in a positive way. And look, those ads, as Justin said, who doesn't like looking at a beautiful mountain range with the sun setting? Should I think of fossil fuels when I see that? I don't think so. I think the one that bothered me the most, and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was CITGO, about doing something about flooding, like buy my gasoline and we'll contribute a penny to address flooding. That's the one that bothered me, I think, for a lot of reasons. And I want to be careful about what I say when I'm being recorded, but that one stood out to me in particular. And so I think those examples that Justin highlighted are pretty good examples of this effort to greenwash, that this product is not harmful or bad. And look, the product is the product. Be accurate about what it is and let Vermonters decide. And, that history, those different iterations that we talked about going back to 1959, that incredibly similar to tobacco, about having information and withholding it and not disclosing it. And so we'll see where this goes. But Justin, before we open up for questions, you want to jump in on anything else?
Yeah, thanks, DJ. I'll mention too, our complaint cites some specific surveys that were done around consumer behavior, because I think it's just important to put some data on it, that we know consumers change their behavior, but it's actually fairly high in the realm of consumer surveys when it comes to climate change. There was one poll in the US that 6 out of 10 respondents changed their habits when talking about climate change, and so they would use renewable energy or carpool or something like that. And then there was a worldwide study of 20,000 adults, and that found that almost 70% of respondents made behavioral changes. And those are really stark numbers when we talk about consumer behavior. In other cases, you don't see 70% of consumers saying they would do something differently, or 60%. You're lucky to get over 50%. And of course, in Vermont, this state is particularly environmentally conscious. So we know those numbers would be even higher in Vermont. So I just want to put that data out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to tell you, it's the other thing I like about this, that line about a reasonable consumer. I think most people, even if they don't identify as an environmentalist, they're environmentalists. Like, people want clean water, they want clean air. They want to see those beautiful green, pristine green mountains. And so let's not get lost in the labels and the fight on labels or semantics, because I think it's just our tradition and the value of this state. Even if you don't self-identify as an environmentalist, we are. And I actually think I'm a pretty good example of that. My background coming into the AG's office, I was a criminal prosecutor. I didn't know a lot about environmental law. And Justin can tell you this, I'm sure Rachel can tell you this, and Rob, environmental law is actually pretty darn confusing. There's a lot of acronyms. and there's a lot of big words that I stumble over. But when you distill it down to what the value is, what are we talking about values? It's actually pretty easy. And my sense is that the vast majority of Vermonters are environmentalists, and even if they don't use that phrase, and if given accurate information, are going to make informed choices that I think is going to be a benefit to all of us. Just, I don't know if you want to talk about all the acronyms in environmental law,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of them.
Rachel's got it.
This is so exciting to hear. I was so proud to see that that the Attorney General's office was taking on this case. As a Vermonter, I'm just really proud to live in a state where our state is taking this kind of action. So just thank you so much for all that you're doing. I know it's an immense amount of work. So we're going to open it up to questions. I see that there's some coming in on the chat. So feel free to raise your hand and or put your question in the chat. And while folks are thinking of their questions and putting them in the chat, I just wondered if you could share. I know there's several states that are suing some of these fossil fuel companies, and I just wonder, as we're taking a closer look at our case in Vermont, are there other states that we should be keeping an eye out for, or is this? It sounds like this is really unique among the different litigation. I just wondered if you could give a quick, are there other states that are like this, or that we could be looking at, or what's the status of some of that?
Yeah, and I'll let Justin jump in on this, but I think there's about 5 or 6 other states: Rhode Island, Massachusetts, I think Minnesota, maybe Connecticut. But I'm not sure they're consumer claims, Justin, are they?
Some of them are, so that's right. There's 6 states total, and Connecticut and Washington, D.C. are the only other 2 that kept it limited to consumer complaints. Consumer deception, so no environmental issues. So Connecticut and DC are the 2 cases to really closely track, and especially Connecticut, because that's in our circuit of federal appeals courts known as the Second Circuit. So even though these are state cases, as General Donovan mentioned, the defendants are trying to say that there's federal law that applies. So we want to watch those cases very carefully.
Great, thank you. So let's turn to Jean Krause. You had 2 questions. One is about whether ethanol is included in biofuel, and one was about, well, I'll let you ask your question. Do you want to unmute?
Yes, I had a conversation, actually a debate, with an employee of Green Mountain Power at an electric car event. And she was insistent that Hydro-Quebec had 0 greenhouse gas emissions. There is good reason, I believe, to doubt the veracity of that statement. And so this is an illustration of Green Mountain Power misleading, or maybe even giving disinformation at a time when Vermont has a climate council that is not considering Hydro-Quebec because it happens to be out of state. And so I was just concerned that perhaps there is a room for a similar, or at least a letter from the Attorney General's office with that. I know what I have would be very hard to document. So that's my comment.
Gene, thanks for your question. I appreciate it. The short answer for me is I don't know, and I'd have to get back to you on that. And I haven't heard that before in regards to Hydro-Quebec, but it's something that we're certainly can consider. But I appreciate the comment, Justin. I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I think we would have to look at Hydro-Quebec, and as it connects to Green Mountain Power, I can say that I'm aware that Green Mountain Power will sometimes buy and sell different renewable energy credits to offset emissions. So it all depends on what they mean in context about being zero emissions. It could just be that they're offsetting with a renewable energy credit purchase, and we certainly want clarity around that. And I think we have to look at their disclosures around that, but that could be one way that they mean that they're zero emissions, is they're buying the credits to offset. And I can respond to your other question about biofuels. Yes, ethanol is the classic example of a biofuel. It's a fermented or distilled corn or sugar that they can put into gasoline. And it can be a helpful bridge fuel. I know the Vermont Climate Council has looked at biofuels, so there's certainly nothing wrong with biofuels. The reason we highlighted it is to show that ExxonMobil, despite claiming to be a greener product, is really investing minimally in biofuels. And certainly if they invested more, that's great. And if they want to disclose that, that'd be even better.
And Gina, thank you for your question. Biofuels could be a great topic for a future conversation. So we can dig into that further. Oh, Rob's already got me. It's in the chat. I guess Attorney General Donovan, if consumers or like Vermonters have concerns like what Jean mentioned, is there someone that they can contact at the Attorney General's office, or how do Vermonters send concerns or questions to the state or your office?
Yeah, email us. That's probably the best way. And
TJ, I think you're muted.
oh, can you hear me?
Oh,
you can hear me?
We got you. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Email us, and we're pretty good about responding to these to constituent questions. And so Justin's going to correct me here. The best way to email me in the office would be at info@ago.vermont.gov. Do I have that right, Justin?
yes, that's the general one. And I can put the CAP email. There's a consumer hotline as well.
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
I'll put that in the chat, and I'll put the email as well.
Yeah, because we're pretty responsive on constituent correspondence. I think that's incredibly important. I kind of preach a little bit to the team about a sense of urgency about responding to Vermonters, and even when we don't have an answer, being responsive is incredibly important to Vermonters because we work for them. And so please email us, and we'll do our best to respond to you and get you the information that you're looking for.
I see. Thank you so much. Betsy, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Can you hear me? I have
Yes, we can hear you.
I have a comment and a question. So my comment is on that product labeling thing where you're saying the use of this product is a contributor to climate change. I would just wish you could add one more word to say that the product is a significant contributor to climate change. Because we're in such a serious crisis now. I think we need to emphasize it more. And then my question is, I was the coordinator of Vermont Interfaith Power and Light for 14 years. I'm retired now, but I'm on the board. Anyway, we were working with communities of faith on climate change. And I showed, as part of that work, I was showing the film Merchants of Doubt around the state. I showed it multiple times. And there's a scene in that film where the leaders of the tobacco industry are all there facing, is it Congress? They were like on trial, and they were called to account. And I'm just wondering, do you think there's any chance that that might happen with the fossil fuel industry? Thank you, and thank you for your work.
Yeah, thanks, Betsy, and appreciate the question and the comment. The first question about Washington, D.C., I'd love to be optimistic about what's going on down there, and I'm hopeful that there can be some congressional action on climate change because it's needed. And in spite of the kind of the dysfunction and gridlock, there's real need for action there. But I look to history, and you reference tobacco, and you reference that scene of that congressional oversight of bringing in, I think, the CEOs of the tobacco company being forced to testify, and of course the power of Congress to subpoena and bring people in and hold them to account. What also was happening was you had 50 states bring a multi-state litigation against tobacco. So you had different lanes coming to bear on the industry, and I think perhaps that would be a useful template in this area. I think you may see it in some different areas as well too. A lot of talk about social media, for example, and the role of the attorneys general is the role to enforce, right? To enforce the law and to enact change through the law. And of course, the power of Congress is the power to pass the law or change the law. And so I think on all these issues, people need to kind of do their jobs. And we're blessed with such a wonderful congressional delegation that I'm hopeful that we can get Congress to act on climate change and let states lead though too. And I think we're doing that in Vermont. I know we've talked about the Climate Council a little bit. It will be interesting to see what comes of that. But I think again, we're lucky in this state, because we're blessed with such a beautiful environment, but we know that pollution doesn't know any state borders, and what happens in other states impacts us. And so we have to continue to do that outreach with our sister states, but also look and help others to take action as really a multi-pronged approach to the issue of climate change. I think that's what's needed, and there's a sense of urgency that's needed too. And I think most people understand that. Justin, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
I think that was a great answer. I think that's exactly right. If there's a chance for the states together and Congress collectively to act, that could be a fruitful path. But so far, the way these cases are shaping up now, is each state is sort of going on its own, and we'll see what comes of it.
Chuck had a great question in the chat. Chuck, do you want to ask your question? I think it's about kind of the extent of this labeling idea. Chuck, did you want to elaborate on your question, or I can read it?
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, this is Chuck in Heartland, down in Heartland, Vermont. And thank you very much, Attorney General Donovan and Attorney Kolber, for this presentation. Really appreciate it. My question is, of course, the fueling of devices, including vehicles, heating devices, and everything else, is only part of the picture, because the devices themselves are harmful. So you might look at it as the cigarette is actually a device that carries the poison into the body, and the automobile is a device that carries the fuel into the atmosphere. So I'm just curious about the opportunity to require the continued sale of fossil fuel devices, including vehicles, heating, lawnmowers, whatever they are, to also have a label similar to the one you're proposing for the fuel itself. Thank you.
That's a great question, Chuck. And let me do what every good lawyer does and ask another lawyer to answer that question. So I'll ask Justin to answer that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would personally like to see that as a consumer. And I think it would more come down to who is in charge of regulating all of those items. So when it comes to regulating gasoline, there's really a vacuum of one single entity being able to tell all the gasoline companies what to do. And that's why states right now are suing for these kinds of disclosures, as opposed to other products that are more directly regulated. I can think of prescription drugs. There's the FDA that more tightly regulates those things. So you mentioned cars. Cars might be regulated directly, or there may be an industry lobbying group. Vermont has the Auto Dealer Association, so there might be pathways for that. And I would say that would be the best way to do it. because absent proof that the car dealers are being deceptive in the same way that Exxon was, I don't see the Attorney General bringing a lawsuit against a vehicle dealer or manufacturer to get the sticker on there. We probably want the sticker on there, but we'd have to go through another avenue. And what comes to mind is whoever is the closest regulatory agency for some of these products or other devices.
So what I was hearing is that it's really also the fact that those companies themselves were hiding and providing misinformation, and that car dealers and the like might not be doing kind of the same level of like deception.
Yeah, the way we're going to get this sticker on the pump is through a heavy-duty lawsuit that says put an injunction against these companies, and that's very different from trying to have a sticker on a lawnmower, which, absent any evidence of deception, we wouldn't get an injunction for that, but we might want to work with someone to voluntarily do that. So that's the difference here.
Other questions from the audience? Feel free to raise your hand. Suzanne, I'm only passing over you because I think we talked about Hydro-Quebec, but did you have another question, or does anyone else want to raise your hand and ask a question? We've got 8 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, my printer's going off, but I mean, we've talked about Hydro-Quebec, but we haven't talked about Hydro-Quebec in this exact particular capacity. So are you going to go after Hydro-Quebec because they do greenwash? How does this implicate other futures for future energy companies or gas companies? How will this pertain to them? Because there's a lot of false information out there, and this can apply to so many different situations, and I'm loving it. So let's get it going.
I'm hearing some real interest in this, using this consumer protection law. So,
yeah, look, I think it's a great tool for us. As Justin said, I think Connecticut and the District of Columbia are doing the consumer claim, and I mean, I think you want to be precise and you want to have the evidence. I think the ads that we outlined in our complaint and tonight are it's compelling. And Vermonters have the right to know, as the question you've raised, I've had, I think in these rules, you have to think about precedent and you have to think about consistency, and I am. And, we've had some internal conversations, but you raise a very good point, and I'll answer it in a lawyerly way by saying we're aware of it.
thank you. Dennis, good to see you.
Thank you. Yes, a couple of quick questions. One, first, I'd like to thank TJ, Justin, for your presentation, but not just for your presentation, for the ongoing impressive efforts you've been making on behalf of Vermont. I very, very much appreciate it. I'm trying to imagine some pushback to the lecture tonight. And the questions would be, so what do you imagine a reasonable length of time before this case would ultimately be adjudicated, and the chances of success of that adjudication, and what's it going to cost Vermont in the meantime to maintain the suit? Thanks again.
Yeah, no, all good questions. Here's the problem with lawsuits. They take a long time, and they cost a lot of money. And as somebody once said to me, if you want to get something done, don't file a lawsuit. And there's real logic to that. I think with this industry, I think you got to file the lawsuit. That being said, you also want to get something done. And I am always willing, and it's a fair criticism of me, that I am always willing to talk to the other side, because I do believe in getting something done. And I think case in point about sometimes where these cases go, and Justin, you're gonna have to jump in on this. We filed, it was a little bit before my time, but it was the MBTE litigation. It was the gas additive that had leaked into the soil. And it was against Exxon and other fossil fuel companies. That went on for like 5 years and didn't go anywhere, to be perfectly blunt about it. And I don't think that's an understatement, Justin, but correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Right.
And there was legal issues. Let's be clear. There was legal issues there. But you got to get something done, because I think, again, time is of the essence. We have that sense of urgency. And so, that means you have to be willing to talk. You have to be willing to compromise. What I've said publicly, so I'd say here is, could we get a program with some Vermont gas station owners to start voluntarily doing the labeling and see how that goes? Justin mentioned the word injunction. That's a court order. Do this or don't do that. It would be do this, put a label on it. And so, you got to bring people along. I think we all see where the market is going. The question is the company, we're in Vermont, what's our market share? Is that going to dictate their business practice? I don't think so. So it's going to be lengthy. It's going to be costly. I think it's a fight worth having. And so we're invested in this. We've retained outside counsel on this to kind of limit, frankly, our money. But if we recover some, we got to pay them on a contingency fee basis. But it's really kind of a force multiplier for our office and a way to cover costs a little bit for a small state to do this. But I think the claim is strong, to answer your question. I mean, the products, they don't create pristine green mountains and, don't help prevent floods. Fossil fuels lead to the increase in flooding, in my opinion. And so we're not saying don't sell your product. We're saying advertise it in a accurate, honest way, period. And so when again, we talk about that lane and being precise on this, I think the claim is incredibly strong. The day we get to litigate it in court, I don't know, because it will be a fight. But I'm always willing to talk to the other side. Could you get a deal in place where you got some labeling, where you got some money, where you got some investments in renewables out of this? Maybe, but that's the beauty of this job, because you can kind of be creative in the if you're willing to talk about what outcomes look like. And I think you have to do that, because I think we've all seen cases that go on for a long time. Look, I'll be very direct with folks. We're dealing with the opiate case right now. The Sacklers, Proof Pharma. That's not where we want it to be in litigation, to be perfectly blunt about it. We're a holdout state in a bankruptcy proceeding. And so I like certainty. I like getting things done. And I like getting an outcome that, again, moves the ball in the direction that we're all trying to move in. And Justin, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
That was perfect. I can just add that we know, as far as timing, there's an extra procedural hurdle that the other states have been fighting about whether the cases get removed to federal court. And that's playing out over a number of months. So that unfortunately might happen here. We can't predict, but we're keeping an eye on that.
So we're at 8:00. Attorney General Donovan, are there any final thoughts? And then we'll talk about what we have coming up next week.
No, just thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rob. Thank you to the Sierra Club for hosting us. And I just want to close by thanking my team, Justin Kolber, Laura Murphy, Rob McDougall, and all the other attorneys and paralegals and staff that worked on this case. Like anything, any good idea comes from people other than yourself, if you're willing to listen. And this is a credit to Justin and the folks he works with for getting this case ready and brought in Vermont State Court. So just a shout out to really a great group of lawyers who are doing just a tremendous work on behalf of Vermonters in so many different ways. So Justin, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, Rob, and everyone here tonight.
Rob, let's talk about what we have coming up next.
Good. Thank you very much, TJ and Attorney General TJ Donovan and Justin Kolber. I appreciate the conversation. So just on our theme, we're going to actually continue with a legal conversation next week about exempting corporations from Vermont's emission rules. Basically, the governor is supporting a plan for global foundries to exempt themselves from our renewable energy standard. So we're going to have Chase Whiting of Conservation Law Foundation and actually Peter Sterling of Renewable Energy Vermont to continue that conversation about that particular issue. So that's going to be a very interesting question. But the reason why we're really much concerned is 8% of Vermont's electricity is used by global foundries. So if there's potential for emissions to be increased if they are allowed to proceed forward with that. So join us for that conversation. But once again, that will also be added to posted on our website afterwards. So if you miss it, join us there. This conversation will be included. So thank you very much for Justin and Attorney General Donovan for joining us tonight. And thank you for Rachel for doing a great job moderating, and Suzanne, who's on our team producing these conversations. So
yes, shout out to Suzanne and the rest of our volunteer team. Have a great night, everybody.